Hey, welcome back. In this video, we're going to get started setting up our aiming mechanics. This means we're going to need an aim action mapping, and we're going to map the right mouse button to our aiming action. Next, we're going to add a Boolean variable to the animation blueprint and figure out how we can set that value based on whether or not we're aiming. Let's get started. So first we need an action mapping. So let's go into Edit and Project Settings, and we'll scroll down and click on Input, and we can add another action mapping here. So I'm going to click plus, and our new action mapping can simply be called Aim. Now I'm going to click on the keyboard keys icon and then right click, and now it's set to right mouse button. So when I right click, our new action event will be fired off in Blueprints. So let's close Project Settings and go back into FPS Character. Now, I no longer need Begin Play right now, so I'm going to delete that node, and I'm going to right-click and type Aim. And I see the action event, Aim, and we have pressed and released. So we're going to do something when we press the right mouse button, and we're going to do something else when we release. Now, we could create a Boolean variable here on the character, but the animation blueprint is going to need that information, and so it makes more sense to put that Boolean on the animation blueprint and set it from here. So let's go back into the animation folder and open FPS AnimBP, and we can add new variables here. So down at the bottom left in the variables section, I can click plus and create a new Boolean, and I'm going to call this isAiming. Now I'm going to click compile. Now you may or may not have noticed at the bottom left, next to the variable, is a little closed eye icon. Now, it's kind of hard to see down there, so I'm going to drag it up here so you can see it and scroll down and show you that there is the icon. Clicking on this eye icon turns on instance editing, which allows editing of variables on a per instance basis. This exposes the variable to any editor that can edit on an instance of that class, such as any actors that exist in a level. Now I'm going to go back into the character blueprint and drag in my mesh. And from the mesh, I can access the animation blueprint. Now the animation blueprint is based on a C++ class called animInstance. So if I type get animInstance, there's a get animInstance function. Now this returns the animInstance for this mesh, but it returns it as an animInstance object reference. That's the parent class. But our animation blueprint is called FPS AnimBP. That is the class that has this variable. So what we need to do is cast to FPS AnimBP. A cast is a special type of node. We can drag off of the return value and type cast to, and it gives us a bunch of options. We want to cast to FPS AnimBP. Now, what a cast does is it takes a particular type of data and it returns a data type that you're casting to under certain conditions. We see that it has two output pins, one regular output pin, and one that says cast failed. What that means is that we were not able to convert the incoming data type to the outgoing data type. This is because we could create an animation blueprint based on the animInstance class, and it could be something else other than FPS AnimBP. Maybe we'd like to make an animation blueprint for some other character skeleton, and we'd call that something else. The mesh function getAnimInstance just returns that base class called animInstance, and so whatever animInstance is applied to that mesh at the time will be returned in the form of that data type. So we wouldn't be able to access any variables or functions that we placed on an animation blueprint that we created, which would be a child of the animInstance data type. The cast, however, will check to see if that object is in fact an FPS AnimBP, which in this case it is, so the cast will succeed. But if we called this cast function on a character mesh that's using some other animation blueprint, then the cast would fail. So let's hook this up to the pressed execution pin, and now with our output from the cast as FPS and MBP, we can drag off and type is aiming, and now we can access is aiming. So we can access this is aiming variable. In fact, we can set it as well. If I drag off and type is aiming, I can use the set is aiming, and now I can use this checkbox to determine whether we should set this value to true or false. I'm going to click the checkbox and hook up our execution pin from cast to FPS and MBP. Now, I don't need this getter node for is aiming, so I can delete it. Now, casting is a relatively expensive operation. So if we can get away with not casting every time, we should. The way we can get away with that is by casting at the very beginning of the game and storing this as a reference to the animation blueprint. I'll show you what I mean. I can right-click and type Begin Play. And from Begin Play, I can perform the cast then. So I can take these nodes and hold Alt and click to disconnect these pins. And now I can move this cast up here to Begin Play and do this here. Now I need to store this animation blueprint value in a variable. Now this can be done in two ways. One, we could add a variable down here and then select the data type. If I click plus and I take the data type for my new variable and change it, here in the search bar I can type FPS underscore NMBP, and here we have this data type. We're going to typically choose object reference. As a class reference is different, that's just a variable representing the class itself and not an object of that class. Soft object and class references represent an unloaded state, meaning they're not loaded with data until you need them. So we would choose object reference here. Now that's one way to get a variable of this type. I'm going to show you another way. So I'm going to take this new variable and delete it. And the other way to make a variable is to take our output value pin, right-click on it, and click Promote to Variable. And now we get a new variable and it's automatically the correct data type. All we need to do is rename it. I'm going to rename this Animation Blueprint. And now we've set a variable on Begin Play that holds our animation blueprint. Now we can access that here in our action mapping. So I can hold Control and click and drag out Animation Blueprint, and now we have access to that blueprint. Now our set is aiming node needs that target hooked up. So I'm going to hook that up, and now I can hook up pressed to the set node, and the variable on the animation blueprint will be set to true. Now we can prove this by compiling and saving and going back into FPS and MBP and going into Event Graph. Now here in Event Blueprint Update Animation, which is called every frame, we can print the value of this is aiming Boolean with a print string node. So we'll add a print string node and we'll control drag in is aiming and hook that up into in string. And now we'll be printing a value to the screen every frame showing us what is aiming is equal to. So let's compile and we'll go back and hit play. And now we see false printed to the screen every frame. Now, if I click in the viewport and hold down the right mouse button, we see true. But if I release the right mouse button, it remains true because we're not setting it back to false. So that's going to be your challenge. We're going to set is aiming back to false on the animation blueprint when the right mouse button is released. Pause the video and go ahead and implement this and play test it to see the value of is aiming when you press and release the right mouse button. Go ahead and give this a try. Okay, so back here in the character blueprint, we're going to take our animation blueprint value, drag off of that, and type is aiming and select set is aiming. And we can hook this up to released. Now, the checkbox here determines what value we're setting it to. We want it set to false, so we're going to leave it unchecked. Let's go ahead and compile and hit play. And now when I right-click, we see true on the screen, and when I release, we see false. So now the animation blueprint knows when we're aiming and when we're not. Perfect. So in this lecture, we added the is aiming Boolean variable to the animation blueprint. And we're setting its value when the right mouse button is clicked or released. And we made a variable for the animation blueprint in our character blueprint and we're saving that on begin play, so that way we don't have to perform an expensive cast frequently throughout the game. This is a great start. In the next video, we'll work on changing the animations based on that Boolean variable in the animation blueprint. I'll see you soon.